All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for taking your time today to join us for our webinar talking all about Microsoft 365 security solutions. As we're getting started, just a quick introduction of our speakers we'll hear from today. We have Micah Heaton from BlueVoyant. Micah is a certified Microsoft 365 security administrator, enterprise expert, and Azure security administrator, and has certifications in platform-specific device management. We also have Jesse Alexander with us today. Jesse is the president of Innovative Technology Solutions, where he leads the strategy, sales, and service delivery for the MSP business. So getting started today, Jesse, I'm going to hand it over to you first and tell us a little bit about ITS.
Well, Bethany, thanks so much, and look forward to having a great session with everybody today. Today we have, this session is hosted by ITS, Innovative Technology Solutions, and we're a end-to-end IT services provider that is mostly focused on targeting the mid to large size enterprise space. And we do provide the entire spectrum of services from end user support with asset management, service desk, as well as the infrastructure monitoring and management, everything dealing with the server, storage, network, and security. And we're going to talk a lot about security today as well. And then, of course, the consulting and strategy that wraps everything around, wraps all of those together and provides that kind of strategic and tactical view on how do you optimize the investments that you're making. So our partner in crime today is Micah with BlueVoyant. And Micah, let me pass it off to you now.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jesse. And thanks everyone for the opportunity to participate in the presentation. Grateful for the opportunity to sit with the group. So let me start off with a teeny bit of housekeeping here and really just kind of lay the story out. The purpose of the presentation is to kind of set a chart that the past few years have shown the emergence of Microsoft as a mainstay in the realm of cloud security, and that's for great reason. So we really want to talk about things from the perspective of identity, from data, from device layers, and help folks understand that might not have checked in on the Microsoft solution, in particular the security stack, to see if there's an opportunity for you to revisit some of those tools and functions for your organization. So we've got a few use cases. You know who we are. We're going to talk about the 2021 trajectory, and also a couple of key points about implementation and where to get started. So setting the stage here, what's the Microsoft story on security and why we care about it? And I'll share a little bit anecdotally that I've been in a number of meetings from kind of a whiteboarding and maturity timeline planning. And in discussing security solutions with namestay vendors, folks that have been in the business for a very long time, it used to be the case that vendor participants could get away with saying things like, put our solution in front of Microsoft, we'll show you everything that they're not catching. That isn't really true anymore, and it hasn't been for a couple of years now. And I think that reporting from the trends industry is really bearing that out. And I think in particular, the past year and a half, as folks well know, our circumstances have changed in a way that have had companies looking for opportunities to really put better cloud-based security vision in the hands of their security operations teams. So it goes without saying that the further our devices, our users, our mission-critical information gets away from our organization, the more configuration drift that we have. So really the story is, how can we put these things within a perimeter that can be extended to the cloud? So all of the money that we're spending and the investments in talent and resources that we're putting towards that perimeter fencing that happens on-prem, that we can actually bind that to our security operations team and give them visibility and a central control plane over that cloud layer, while giving folks the quality of life that they need to be able to work remotely, and also the security operations team the comfort and peace of mind that things are still well in hand. So it's impossible for us to, where circumstance forced our hands last year, to simply do away with our on-prem infrastructure, and there really isn't necessarily a need to. One of the great pieces of the Microsoft story is the ability to leverage the emerging cloud tools in a way that give you coverage over the on-prem infrastructure as well, either outright in those portals themselves, or because they have the capability of integrating with on-prem solutions like Configuration Manager, for instance, or your Active Directory and domain controllers on-prem. But the idea is that if you continue down the path that you might have previously in selecting best of breed tools to secure your on-prem infrastructure, suddenly you're exposed to so many different variables with the emergence of cloud that it might be difficult not only for you to continually evaluate those best in breed products for the cloud, but also to ensure that you have the right kind of talent and resources on staff at all times to manage all of it. So I'd like to hand the mic over just for a moment. From Jesse's perspective, what do you think is the real value in looking at these trends and reportings? We know that Microsoft has been catapulting in these various categories from Gartner and Forrester. And as a take-home slide, there's some sources down at the bottom for folks to review with internal stakeholders. But why is this important when we're talking about the slides previous, Jesse?
Yeah, well, thanks, Micah. I mean, if you take a look at this, so one of the ways that we select solutions is by taking a look at independent sources like Gartner or Forrester or IDC. And when we see Microsoft consistently in that upper right-hand corner, that's just an indication that they're investing in the services, they're investing in the products, they're making sure that they are connected, that they have the interfaces throughout that provides that seamless experience, which is why Microsoft stays in that quadrant there. Like your previous slide talks about, we're dealing with complexity. We're dealing with the availability of talent. We're dealing with rising costs of dealing with this stuff. So trying to put all of that together, Microsoft is a great way to go. And look, nobody has been fired because they selected Microsoft. They're a very capable integrated solution. And, a lot of times we'll talk about some of it later on. Microsoft may not be the only solution from a security point of view we put in place, but it certainly is going to be the basis for a lot of it.
What a great point. I like that. I appreciate the feedback. And I think that takes us into our next section a little bit. Where does Sentinel fit into the landscape? Is one of those investments that Microsoft has made, as Jesse is talking about. There's a little bit of myth around Azure Sentinel and what its real capabilities are. So I want to kind of explain the background that we took as an organization for investigating Azure Sentinel. It came on the market in 2019, February. So it's just over 2 years old now. And really, we set about vetting it, confirming if it was a genuine cloud native SIEM. We knew what it could probably do as an integrated tool within the Microsoft Cloud ecosystem, but would it be possible to take all of the other third-party data sources and logs and move them into Sentinel in a way that was cost optimized, but also gave us the automated outcomes that we've come to enjoy in some of our other SIEM solutions? And if that was true, then we could really start banking some programmatic development around it. So Microsoft provides that really nice introductory layer into these tools that they build in a lab. Our job is in the wild to vet them out and put that layer of programmatic value on top of it. So some nice take-home slides here for the group to kind of see as we move into the concepts behind Azure Sentinel. I want to give everyone the peace of mind and know to walk away with the impression that Azure Sentinel is a genuinely fully capable cloud native SIEM, which means we haven't met a log source that we haven't been able to ingest. There are some times when Microsoft's inherent connectors aren't available for a specific kind of firewall, but we've never failed to put a internal custom solution in place to grab that data. So we might actually program out a parser in C# to get something that isn't available inherently in the Microsoft connectors, but we can grab all of it and do it in a way where we really tune down those log sources. And that's really important as we're speaking to this slide, because folks have hybrid infrastructure and there's so many reasons to hold on to it. There's good reasons why it's required, whether it's a legacy application in your accounting team that aren't going to be able to move away from it, or the cost justification to move is simply insurmountable. So Microsoft has built this awesome tool set, the Defender stack you might have heard, that allows you to drive fantastic outcomes from Sentinel and the automations that you've come to expect from your SIEM solution. Because all of these tools work in a way that provides a foundational layer of value to the other tools if they're configured properly. So I'll take a moment to share that later on in the presentation, we'll be diving into these individual tool sets with a little bit more clarity. But I really wanted to share that Sentinel is that connective tissue between all of these tools for you to drive very unique outcomes for specific use cases that you might be up against. And we'll talk about one of those. And then I'll have Jesse kind of weigh in on his thoughts about automation as well. We were working with oh, sorry, go ahead, Jesse.
No, go ahead, not yet, go right ahead.
Yep. So we were working with an academic institution that was under the impression they suspected that their students were cheating when they were taking exams. And the way that they thought that was happening is that they were authenticating their MFA tokens for other students that would then come in on that user's identity and complete the exam. For an academic institution, that's not acceptable. The entire credibility of an organization that's business is based on giving justified accreditations to students, degrees even, is called into question. So they really needed a solution that would solve back for this. Fortunately, the Microsoft security stack, especially in that top level license, that M365 E5 license, comes with everything that the organization really needed in order to solve back for this. So the first thing was being able to detect these logins in a way that gave us visibility over where somebody was. We could see that students that were logging in or attempting to log in, and then the student that was authorizing the MFA token a world away were traveling impossibly. And that's part of the Azure Active Directory identity protection solution. And we can feed that data into Microsoft Cloud App Security to do some additional enrichment. Microsoft Cloud App Security is Microsoft's CASB, their cloud application security broker. So we could take that data from Azure Active Directory to confirm impossible travel and do some additional correlations in Microsoft Cloud App Security to really finely tune the truth of the circumstance and feed that into Azure Sentinel. Once Azure Sentinel had the ability to see it, that's where the real magic happens. Of course, from your SIEM perspective, you're leveraging the SIEM to perform some automations. That's exactly what you can do with Azure Sentinel using something called a logic app, which is essentially a playbook that follows a conditional set of rules to provide automated outcomes for your organization. And it works something like this. If Azure Sentinel detects through MCAS and Azure Active Directory identity protection that a circumstance where one student was traveling impossibly to authorize their MFA token, if that circumstance was met, then Azure Sentinel is going to do a couple of things through that playbook. It's going to revoke the student's MFA token so that the door never pops open. That second student was never allowed in to complete the authorization chain and actually do the test. The second thing that happens is a distribution, an email fires off to a distribution in exchange, letting the SecOps team, the security admins, know that this particular incident occurred with specific details, timestamps. This student at these two locations attempting to access this resource and possibly traveled, which is a very good indication of academic fraud. Another thing that happens using Azure Active Directory's hierarchy is firing off a Teams message to the student's advisor. The bot, essentially, in Logic Apps goes out through Teams and messages on behalf of the playbook. The student's advisor letting them know this circumstance happened, essentially creating that manual touch point. That student advisor's got some work to do. They got to check in on the student, and there's going to be some kind of remediation outcomes on the personal level. And then the last thing, because of Defender for Endpoint and Intune and Microsoft Endpoint Manager, the device itself, if it's owned by the school and it's managed by that Azure instance, can actually be locked down. It can be shut away from, or quarantined, if you will, from other intellectual property, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams. All of these are resources that the student would no longer have access to if they repeatedly tried to commit this fraud. Now, this is unique to the academic institution from the standpoint that it was a student, that it was a test, but this concept of insider risk lives everywhere. And so I'd like to take a moment to have Jesse share his thoughts on the importance of automation and really that use case in particular as it could play out in any kind of business vertical.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's a great example there. And, you know, it absolutely kind of well describes the SOAR, which I think most of us know is the security orchestration, automation, and response there. You know, and that use of these tools doesn't come out of the box. You don't activate it and all of a sudden, great, you get all of that benefit. It takes the security engineer, it takes someone configuring that one, creating the conditional rules and making that happen. And this is really where we're going to kind of go, well, just because you bought the tools doesn't mean you have immediately the automation. You now have to develop it. And that's where then it becomes this issue of, do you have the skill sets to do this? Do you have the skill sets to manage and develop and tune your environment? Or do you need someone to help manage that and develop that for you? And deciding to do that in-house and staffing that versus using a partner to help manage that one is a decision that every company has to make. A lot of times, though, most companies will decide that they're going to hire some really good security engineers for first shift, and forget that their second shift, third shift, and the weekends that security engineer doesn't really want to and can't cover either. So making sure that we address that you do want to automate, but you also figure out how are you going to manage these tools and with what resources.
Such a great answer.
Micah.
Yeah, such a great answer, Jesse. Thank you. And I think on the screen is bearing that out. These configurations behind the scenes of these tools are important. There are certainly best practice documentation that Microsoft provides in order to drive the best kinds of outcomes. But at the end of the day, Microsoft is in fact a software company. And it's important to look for opportunities to bring in trusted advisors that can help you build out a strategy for leveraging these things based on your use cases. Maybe you didn't realize it was possible to do impossible travel detection and then build out a playbook like you see before you in order to drive that kind of outcome. The whole point of this is to make things simpler. And if we can make things simpler, then we're making an impact. And I suppose also it would be good for us to drive down the amount of touches that your internal ops teams on help desk, end user compute need to constantly have from a security standpoint if you can put the right kind of guardrails in place in the first place. And I think a good opportunity to have this discussion as well is where a good place is to start when we're talking about organizations looking at managing all of this internally, figuring out what a partner scenario might look like. From your perspective, Jesse, where is the best place to start? We're talking cloud security, helping organizations know where that shift happens. What have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, this is, it seems like an easy answer, but there is, we've got a number of companies represented on this webinar here, and every company is going to have a different place to start because they find themselves right now at a different place because they're just starting. They're an emerging company, they're an existing company that's got a lot of different layers that have been built on over the years. And so the very first thing that the very best place for everybody to start is an honest assessment of what their current situation is, and more importantly, what their risk profile is. Because what they're going to want to do is address those risks first. So there's not a cookie cutter, answer for everybody. Everyone should always start here, but everyone should always start with an honest assessment of their current risk profile and what do they need to do to fix that risk. And that's optimizing your investment, your time, and your resources.
I like that a lot. The concept of helping organizations understand how to maximize the investment they're making, certainly in their Microsoft tools. A phrase that we hear a lot on the engineering side is lift and shift. If an organization has fully on-prem infrastructure, they want to start figuring out what their cloud migration looks like. There's always this onus on the org to lift and shift. And I would argue that certainly that's merited. It's worthwhile to have that conversation. I'd say that the best place to start is actually with security. And folks are probably doing this without even realizing it. Jesse and I were talking earlier before the presentation about this, and I was making the suggestion that sometimes organizations' journey to the cloud starts with a single mailbox, or it starts by moving SharePoint on-prem to the cloud. You're moving intellectual property, corporate assets to the cloud, and there are some foundational security principles that Microsoft uses in order to secure those environments, but none of those have been flexibly applied to your organization or the individualized use cases that you might have. So I would say that before you move everything to the cloud, it's a good idea to figure out what your security story is. And unfortunately, I just don't see that enough. As a security engineer myself, I just don't see folks looking for opportunities to frame out the security scaffolding. What does the apparatus for our security look like before we start moving sensitive information to the cloud, identities to the cloud? And the first thing that happens when I mentioned that people are doing some kind of security, when you migrate to Exchange Online, through the course of that, you're usually figuring out what your identity solution is. But it kind of stops there. And I think there's an opportunity for folks at that stage to frame out what their identity and access management policies look like. And fortunately, the cloud-based version of Microsoft's identity and access management controls are awesome. And I say that with total zeal, that with a little bit of time and a little bit of learning, you can have very mature identity posture policies in place within a very short amount of time. And to give you a little bit of context about this, Microsoft calls this conditional access. It's part of that Azure Active Directory premium package. And Azure Active Directory Premium Plan 1 and 2, which comes with those M365 bundled licenses, or even those top-end Office 365 licenses. And it gives you the ability to determine exactly what the name suggests, whether or not you should give a user access based on conditions having been met or not met. I'll give you a little use case here. One of the things that folks bring to the table quite often is, hey, our end users have kind of been living a life of luxury working from home. We weren't in a position where we could really give everybody corporate equipment as soon as we needed to. So folks got very used to using their devices from home, not just their personal laptops, but also have become very accustomed to using their mobile devices. Help us understand how we can put some identity and access management framework in place without compromising that experience. We don't want there to be all of this backlash, but we do at the end of the day need to protect the organization. And with conditional access, it's possible for you to select that folks that are signing in from a mobile device, an iOS or an Android, for instance, you don't want them to have the ability to log into a browser, so you can stop that from happening. The system can detect that that user is logging into the browser-based version of the app instead of the application itself. One of the reasons that you might drive someone to the application itself is because application protection policies can be applied to known Microsoft applications like Outlook or Teams. So you can encourage users who want to continue using non-corporate equipment to use the official applications which you have some governance over. Microsoft put something in place called the Software Development Toolkit that lets you prevent things like cut, copy, paste, screenshotting, syncing data from Exchange Online to the native version of Mail on iOS or the native Contacts app, or even more importantly, syncing any corporate data to iTunes or iCloud, just outright preventing that. It puts an encrypted container around those Microsoft applications, and other software vendors are embracing that software development toolkit. So those same policies can apply to third-party applications as well. So in a very short amount of time, you've put some really solid guardrails in place around folks that are working from home without too much end user productivity impact, maybe just a little bit of shift in workflow. Hey, you can continue to use your phone, your mobile device, but you need to use corporate approved applications. We don't require that you enroll your device into Intune or have kind of this Skynet management apparatus if that's going to be too much of a lift for your end users, but you can put some softer policies in place that really give you maturity. And if you're an organization like that, have kind of maybe got behind on that, you've got folks who are spun up accessing corporate infrastructure without realizing that it's unprotected, or you knew it in the back of your mind, but you just weren't sure the avenue that you could take. Conditional access is such a good place to start. I really like what Jesse said about just simply assessing risk, sitting around the round table and making a determination about who in the environment is accessing your infrastructure and in what ways is a very good place to start. Another piece of the Microsoft landscape that allows you to do that kind of activity is Microsoft Cloud App Security. And one of the coolest things about Microsoft Security is that it doesn't make hard and fast judgments about individual users. What it does is over time, it continues to collect a baseline of information against a user and build a persona of normalization. So if I'm logging in to send an email to Jesse about some work-related matters, 9 times out of 10, I do that from my home. But the 10th time, I've actually traveled to grandma's house. I'm logging in from her computer. I'm logging in from the browser-based app instead of the application itself, the rich client, you could say. My behavior from a sign-in perspective is a little bit different. Should that be denied outright? Perhaps not. But should the system be detecting departures of normalization and constantly assessing risk and adding that to a pool, an aggregation score that says over time, hey, Micah is talking to Jesse, he's doing his normal work function, but he's behaving genuinely depart from his normal baseline. So my risk score might go from a low to a medium, perhaps even to a high. And within a period of time, that threshold being crossed could result in some outcomes that require me to check in with the SecOps team. Just let them know, hey, I got locked out because of this or that. And they could say, oh yeah, you've been all over the place. It's not impossible travel, but it is atypical travel. In fact, it shows that you've logged in from a number of devices, a hotel lobby, a kiosk at the hotel lobby, some devices that we've never seen before. And being able to track all of that information in one spot really requires that you have all of the tools running in a way that they are sharing that kind of information. So Jesse's comment about assessing risk in your environment is so easy to do with the Microsoft tool sets because they have that innate connective tissue below, and all of that information can be fed into Sentinel to drive automations. To do that next piece, instead of having a help desk rep do a thing, you can have Sentinel trigger a thing, and that's truly fantastic. One of the other pieces that I really like about Microsoft Cloud App Security, that CASB solution, is the ability to do shadow IT detection. So if folks are on a device that's owned by the organization and it's leveraging Microsoft's next generation antivirus and endpoint detection and response tool, Defender for Endpoint, and you have the ability to track the usage that's occurring in an organization. What I mean by that is perhaps you've told folks to stop using Dropbox because you have an enterprise account for Box. And you don't want folks to constantly put corporate information into a different repository. You have the ability to do a little bit of reconnaissance for a period to find out what kind of shadow IT that's going on. Folks are using these other cloud-based tools in order to accomplish their task, and then do a little bit of reflection. Should we embrace that tool in an officially managed way? Is that providing some kind of benefit for our end users that our official corporate solution is not? Let's consider it. Let's think about that. That's an important piece of that reconnaissance. But then the other piece is to really identify when we lock this behavior down and we officially unsanction this application, what's the response we're going to get from end users that's going to flood our IT department with a whole host of questions and activity. So you have the ability to start monitoring what's happening in your environment before you make these hard and fast rules. That's always going to be to the benefit of your organization, to identify investigation priority ahead of time, to figure out what those abnormal activities are, what the alert volume might look like if you were to spin up production level rules, and also to really see the user context requires a little bit of understanding and familiarity with your users. Perhaps you need to reach out to a manager and say, hey, so-and-so is in France. Were they supposed to be working in France? Is that something that you approved? And then help kind of clean up behavior in your environment. That's that governance and compliance piece. And it can't be understated how Microsoft makes that so much easier than if you were using, admittedly, otherwise best in breed tools, but those are disparate technologies that you're hoping you can drive to successful outcomes. Whereas these tools within the Microsoft ecosystem are all talking to each other behind the scenes. You really just got to tune them in the appropriate ways. You got to create action points between those tools based on that communication they're doing behind the scenes. So I want to jump into the 2021 trajectory for Microsoft and what that means for your organization. And my next slide is one of my favorites. If you circle and star anything from this presentation, I want it to be this 8T right here. 8 trillion threat signals analyzed daily, not weekly, not monthly, not yearly. That's the amount of signals intelligence that Microsoft is able to collect, analyze, and harness to the benefit of M365 customers across the whole tenancy. All of the Microsoft tenants working behind the scenes are basically contributing to this analysis. There isn't another provider in the space that is managing the identity layer like Azure Active Directory, the operating system layer, like Windows, and then the data layer, like the productivity and collaboration platform in Office 365. And I'll say that G Suite has some of this capability, but is not looking at the same kind of maturity between the various products in order to contribute to the machine learning, the automations, and the natural integrations that are possible between these technologies. And I guess the real take-home point is that an organization of tens of thousands of users, maybe 50,000 endpoints, a Fortune 100 company, they are driving these technologies in the exact same way that an organization of 200 users would, which means that a smaller organization of 200 endpoints gets to benefit from these technologies in the exact same way, of access to the same underlying information. If malware is detected in runtime half the world away, with Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft Cloud App Security, Sentinel in place, you can see that happening within seconds to minutes and operationalize remediations against it. If it's the first time that kind of malware package has been seen and Defender for Endpoint puts it through the detection chamber and determines that a process that's otherwise normal, but is generating outbound network activity and shouldn't, and it's done so in a way that hasn't quite seen before, you're going to benefit from that the same way that bigger organizations do. So there's no isolation or missed opportunity because you're not an organization of the same size. And I really think that's incredible. Maybe you could call that like democratizing security, perhaps. And I think that's an incredible benefit. One of the other pieces, and I think that Jesse was kind of talking about this a little bit earlier, so I'll actually hand over the mic here in a moment to have him weigh in on this, but Microsoft on its own isn't actually looking over to take over the whole universe of security. They recognize that organizations have incumbent products that they really like, that have been solving problems for them in very good ways for a number of years, or entire strategies of security are based on one of these tools being the linchpin of that strategy. And so it's not really a good investment for an organization to try to move away from it. In those circumstances, Microsoft recognizes those values, the value of those technologies, and puts it in the hands of these vendors to integrate with the Microsoft solution, opens the doors to integrate with the security graph, they call it, the intelligent security graph that allows Azure Active Directory to bind to other security solutions and make really clean API calls in ways that allow you to continue using those products while benefiting from the rest of the Microsoft ecosystem that you might be licensed for. And I think this security by inclusion story that Microsoft is really at the forefront of is truly incredible. I'll give Jesse the opportunity to kind of talk about that from the standpoint of vendor consolidation and the introduction of complexity into your environment, if you have anything to share there.
Yeah, thanks, Micah. Yeah, I mean, look, security is a layered activity. There's a like your previous slide showed, there's a number of different tools. There's a number of different services. There's a number of different hardware devices that all have to be addressed in a holistic security solution. And I like the fact that Microsoft's solutions really do provide an overarching and integrated solution to address a number of the aspects of that security posture across most of the layers, or actually all of the layers of security. But they're not going to be the one size fits all for everything. There are best in breed tools out there that address some of the gaps and the weaknesses there. And so, sure, we want to try to intentionally, if we're going to start from scratch, we like to intentionally architect a solution that is as simple as possible with the fewest tools possible and all that sort of thing. But most companies are dealing with multiple legacy tools and systems that maybe they fit a purpose when they first came in, but now there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of redundancy. And so how do you best use those tools? And I think your slide just a couple ago that talked about how many vendors and the spend that's there. The benefit of Microsoft is bringing it in the opportunity to go ahead and consolidate some of that effort there. And this slide shows the breadth of the Microsoft offerings, each of the different things that it can do there. But then each of us as our companies get to decide, look, we want a little extra protection. We want to use the Microsoft, but take advantage of that ability to integrate with and have, and use the SDKs and have the other OEMs like a Mimecast or Webroot provide the things that they do really well. That is an incremental add to the security posture we decide to accept.
Great points. I like it a lot. And as a security organization as well, we do represent other solutions besides Microsoft. So that's a really good opportunity for us to help organizations kind of weigh where the value of their Microsoft investment really starts and stops, and having a candidate that represents multiple technologies to really give you some good insight as to how Defender for Endpoint perhaps might compare against something else in the space from an EDR technology standpoint. Each one of these are pronouns in a wheel of security that where you aren't looking for opportunities to consolidate from a vendor and cost out standpoint might be worth looking at, certainly to help reduce the amount of kind of tool fatigue that you might have in your environment. What's the best place for you to look at to start with? And I think this is a bit callback to what Jesse was saying about the risk assessment that you want to look at for your organization. Microsoft calls this their kill chain slide. And it's a really good way of showcasing how the various technologies in the Defender stack in particular pair out against other things that you might see in the space. So an EDR tool, an identity provisioning tool, a CASB tool. There are other security technologies. For instance, the Enterprise Mobility and Security Stack includes information protection tools, DLP tools, endpoint management tools like Intune. But we know after Ignite from October, Microsoft was making some considerable investments in consolidating those advanced threat protection tool sets into a single kind of umbrella, into a single Defender family, where each one of those technologies was responsible for defending a specific area that make up an entire attack stage, perhaps overall. So this is a really good take-home slide for you to see where Defender for Office might be playing a role in protecting and helping with mail hygiene. Identity protection is helping you with that identity provisioning system, privileged identity management, privileged access, that conditional access controls. And these things feed the information plane in Defender for Endpoint. So if malware is detected in Cloud App Security, for instance, in OneDrive, you can also see corollary information for that individual user against the devices that they have Defender for Endpoint enabled on, to say, where did that malware come from? Was its root on one of these devices before we even had Defender for Endpoint in place? What was detected there? To be able to correlate activity across all of the layers in the cloud space, as well as your on-prem infrastructure and endpoints, is a really big deal. To be able to take all of that signals intelligence and aggregate it into a single stream and see how information, users, the data that they're working in flow from one place to another, and be able to govern the way that it behaves depending on the plane that they're on in the operating system, in Office 365, in Azure AD, because it's connected to G Suite or Dropbox. That's really powerful. So the same DLP tools that you might be using to prevent me from sending Jesse a document over Teams that has 100 social security numbers in it, using Microsoft Cloud App Security, you can leverage those same sensitivity labels, those same data leakage prevention tools to prevent that same document from being uploaded into G Suite or a third-party application. We talked about at the beginning, being able to extend our on-prem perimeter to the cloud. But the story doesn't stop there. Being able to extend your Microsoft Cloud perimeter out to the other SaaS and PaaS applications in the cloud beyond Microsoft is a capability that Microsoft in many ways alone brings to the table because of that pairing with Azure Active Directory and identity protection. It's an incredibly unique and powerful combination that gives your organization robust tools with perhaps a smaller investment, but an easier investment that gets you away from that tool fatigue. Now, where we're looking to help solve problems in this space is to identify the ways that you can leverage an MSSP. You might be solving for some of these problems for the business day, but might be looking for an opportunity to put some folks in the watchtower, maybe 11 at night into 5, 6 in the morning. think Jesse was talking about that briefly a little bit earlier. And we have a programmatic layer of value that we bring to all of these technologies. We know that Microsoft makes amazing technology in the lab, as I said before, but our job is to really find where those niches are, the use cases, the things that aren't immediately solved for with a drop-down menu or a click in the Microsoft portal that need to be programmed in a little more depth in the graph, or perhaps with an API call. That's where we come in to say, your organization has this specific use case. You haven't yet mastered a way in the internal portal from Microsoft to solve for it. We know the tools can do it. Let us show you how, so you can walk forward with some future proofing into your future cloud engagements. And the way that we do that is specifically with a couple of accelerators that we offer in the marketplace right now. And you would be looking through your ITS accounts team to leverage these as an opportunity to do two things: either to stand up Sentinel for your organization because you don't know what it is, or you've tried and you're not fully sure that you're getting your consumption driven down, your costs optimized, all of your logs ingested properly, that they're behaving in the way they're supposed to with the other tools. That's where we come in. And I would say that as a singular organization, we've probably done more Sentinel deployment together than any other individual organization out there, which means that we've seen a lot. So we know how to solve for a lot of those kind of weird edge cases that maybe aren't completely illustrated or have answers for in the Microsoft documentation. The other accelerator that we're working with in the marketplace right now is the M365 Defender Accelerator, which is all of the Defender products, meaning Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, Defender for Office, and Microsoft Cloud App Security. Those all have a story that pairs up with Sentinel, but an organization might be looking to simply start with those Defender stacks to put governance and compliance in place, and then look down the road from a timeline perspective to put Sentinel in place, or to actually drive these accelerators together. So you have all the governance, the EDR, the NGAV, the identity solution, and the productivity and collaboration platform locked down while driving the Cadillac of SIEM solutions in Azure Sentinel paired with all of that automation. So we really look for an opportunity to provide a scoped engagement, discovery sessions on how these things can best be leveraged for your organization to drive really good security outcomes that you can either take back and manage yourself or look to have ITS partnership manage on your behalf. And I think that's a good place to pause for a second. I believe, Bethany, that in the lead up to this presentation, you actually collected some questions from individuals that were interested in getting some answers. So I'll hand it over to you to kind of share some of those with us.
Great, thank you, Micah, and thank you, Jesse, for both of you for sharing this presentation and your expertise around this topic. We do have a few questions and we'll get into it. And while we're going through these, if anyone else has questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. So the first question, here we go, guys. So are these standalone solutions, or can they take input from multiple antivirus or SIEM or other logging generation devices?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we did talk about that some during the presentation today, especially the one slide that showed kind of that whole universe of the different companies, where the Microsoft solutions certainly operate within a universe of other partners that can be integrated together in a seamless way, and you as a company get to decide to what extent you want to use some of those tools and those best practices there, best tools there, and to what extent you want to use a more singular platform.
I agree with that answer, Jesse, and I'll simply add that yes, while these tools have the capability of, on the Microsoft side, of being driven individually, the best outcomes you can have are by driving them together and allowing those advanced integrations between the tools. It'd be a missed opportunity to not at least explore how they work together and could answer back for some of those use cases.
Yeah.
Great, thank you both. All right, the next question we have here, and Jesse, I'll start with you on this one. Microsoft has created a significant suite that allows for MCAS tier or endpoint defender security, which is great, but how much management is needed for those tools to get the full benefit of these security solutions?
Yeah, I mean, these tools are how should I say, they're not for the faint of heart, right? Um, there's a level of, like Micah said, Microsoft's a software company. And there are a lot of Microsoft certified professionals, MCPs out there who have learned how to configure these tools and make the right selections in concert with the policies and the intentional decisions and the risk mitigation desires for each company. So, I think we talked about that earlier. There's that whole assessment that really kind of needs to happen. And if you do that, then that helps you figure out where do you want to do things and how do you want to block all access to certain cloud applications or just some of it? Do you want to block some people? Its roles, its responsibilities, it's all of that. So, when it comes to using these tools, there is a significant level of management. And is that your one engineer or a handful of engineers in a security team, or do they need to be augmented by a team that can help tune the tools, provide the ongoing development of the conditional rules, and the evening weekend coverage as well? Micah, what else would you add to that?
Yeah, that exists when investing and investigating the security solution for your organization. And there's good reason for that, right? The CISOs and security officers really take great stock and care, for the most part, in looking to keep coverage over internal systems, exactly that, internal. But I think that organizations sometimes get put in a place that isn't great from a management standpoint because they delay looking for an advisor that has a mastery over these tools and can give your organization immediate time to value. So I would say that it's exactly the opposite of what you might feel, in that it's probably irresponsible not to at least look for a little bit of training and a little bit of help from an advisory standpoint, if not an overall management and monitoring standpoint, by an advisor that has the accreditations in the space and really help accelerate, is the word, your organization's security posture.
Yeah.
Great, thank you both. All right, the next question, and this is in reference to previous slides that you covered, Micah. The question is, how much automation can you expect in a fully deployed Microsoft environment?
I like this question, and it's because there is a ton of potential. There's a lot of potential. And this really just goes back to what Jesse was saying. These tools on their own have a wild amount of potential, and you could make them as complicated or as simple as you want. But I would say out of the box, when you get a license, sometimes the difficulty and the reasons why I see organizations down selecting their license level is because they never figured out how to fully drive the full value of that automation potential. So they purchased in at a pretty significant or otherwise costly bundled package. They didn't do all of the vendor consolidation they were supposed to in the first place. So they never really cut over to the solutions. And B, they never looked for the opportunities to turn on all of the advanced integrations and automations and really solve back for some of those edge cases, form the internal security council to come up with sort of the design ideas and the scaffolding and framework that was required to really drive them. So with all of the solutions working together, there is a lot of automation potential, but you still have to do the work. And every security technology is like this. Part of our offering from a managed services perspective is that we provide a kind of white glove advisory around all things Microsoft, even if this isn't necessarily fit in that Sentinel or Defender category, because we know that there are a lot of pronouns, there's a lot of technologies, and there's a lot of use cases. And the more that we understand about your Microsoft environment, the better we'll be able to generate good outcomes from the Security Operations Center. We know that your needs are a little bit different, from 1 month to the next, based on how that environment maturity is coming along. And Jesse, certainly, please add in anything.
Oh, I agree with what you just said there. Absolutely. you can certainly automate a lot of things, but ultimately it's an ongoing effort, because you find a use case that's repeated enough that you can automate it, and then you're going to find you're going to get additional alerts or additional behavioral logs that you're going to then have to consider. Is that a risk? Is that a behavior? Is that an activity that you want to allow or not? And so it's part of the security activity that has to keep going on a daily basis, and we can certainly help with the management and the providing of that services, but ultimately every company has to decide who's going to do that and make sure that it gets done.
All right, well, before we wrap up, we have time for one more question. And before I get to it, if we don't have time to get to your question, we will be taking the questions from the chat and we'll follow up with you directly. But the last question for today. All right, so in regards to the conversation around simplicity and consolidation. So the question is, simplicity and consolidation are helpful, but what are you giving up by consolidating?
What are you giving up by consolidating? Yeah, we did talk some about that one, and the goal is not necessarily to have just one one software solution, but to really cover the risk of your business. And so as we use the Microsoft solution as a basis for a measure of that security, we're gonna take a look at some of the other tool sets out there, and with in a process that leverages the multiplicity of tools that we're going to select.
Yeah, we don't want you to compromise a function that's mission critical to your production business. And if that means that you stick with an incumbent solution from the CASB side, it might be the case that as a standalone tool, that is actually a better product for your organization. And because in some cases we have historically been vendor agnostic, I'll repeat that the point of our engagements is really to help you see where the Microsoft value starts and stops, not to encourage you to consolidate across the board where it doesn't make sense for you to do so. And the add-on to that is Microsoft Cloud App Security might actually be a little bit younger than some of the other CASB solutions out there, or more importantly, it doesn't have the function or the feature on its own that you're looking for. And you just didn't realize that you could deploy your DLP solutions to the endpoints that you created in Microsoft Cloud App Security. You just didn't know that you could combine it with the power of Defender for Endpoint to extend that cloud perimeter and those access controls in the same way you have them in the cloud down to your endpoint. So it's probably just about having a conversation in a good reflection and demonstrating active listening on our side to ensure that we're not talking over some of those incumbent solutions that are actually doing good things in your outfit.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thank you for your time today to join us. Micah, Jesse, thank you both for this great presentation and your commentary for the last 45 minutes. Everyone that joined, thank you for your time. And we'll be following up with a recording of this webinar, and the slides for this presentation will be available. And again, if you have questions and they're in the chat, we'll get back to you. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to us at info@innovativetech.com and we will get answers, and happy to continue that conversation.
Thank you so much,
Thanks
Bethany. And thank you,
You're
Jesse,
welcome.
for the opportunity to stay with the ITS group, and look forward to opportunities to chat.
Absolutely enjoyed it, Micah. Thanks, Bethany. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.